for these modern plant-based meat and dairy products, what we're trying to do, what the industry is trying to do, is not make a better vegan burger patty, right? It's to create something that is going to help meat eaters or dairy consumers move away from animal-based products, because these new versions taste just as good as or better. They're better for you and they cost the same. And the current technologies just aren't there yet.
Though we live in a time when lots of alternative proteins are available to consumers, industrial animal agriculture continues to thrive and wreak havoc on the environment through deforestation, biodiversity loss, water pollution, and greenhouse gas emissions. Fortunately, brilliant minds are working hard to find solutions to these pressing issues, and our guest today is one of them. David Welch, PhD, is a plant biologist, a running coach, and the chief scientific officer and co-founder of Synthesis Capital, a global food technology and alternative protein investor aiming to transform our food system and remove animals from the equation. He's here with us to talk about his work with new food technologies, the perception of alternative proteins, and on a personal level, how fitness and a plant-based diet played a key role in his preparation and recovery from heart surgery. Dr. Welch also appeared on our podcast, you might remember, the ones who've been around for a while, in episode 37. And he's one of the athletes pictured in our very own plant-based playbook available on Amazon. And we are so stoked to have you back on the show, David. Welcome.
Thank you, Dotsie. Thank you, Alexandra. It's an honor to be back.
Well, I have to say thank you in front of all of our listeners. We've certainly grown a lot since episode 37. And so many of our listeners are aware of some of the work that Switch for Good does as an organization. And I just want to publicly say a giant appreciation from my heart to yours on all of the support and the love and the energy that you've put into kind of cradling Switch from almost day one, and believing in our journey and believing in why we're here and what we, stated that we're here to do. And we're more than 5 years in now, which is shocking because I feel like it was yesterday that you and I connected, but thank you. I just wanted to start with that.
Thank you, Dotsie. I mean, I think what you guys are doing at Switch for Good is so important, and a big part of helping people transition to a more healthy, more sustainable diet.
So now we're more than 250 episodes in.
Wow.
And a lot has happened, both globally, like a pandemic, and in your own life since we last spoke, because that was in 2019. You started your own company. And as Dotsie mentioned, you've had open heart surgery. So can we start there? Because I think our audience is going to be very interested, because you're such a healthy person, an avid runner, a running coach. 2.5 months ago, you had open heart surgery for bicuspid aortic valve disease. That's a mouthful. Can you share with us what that is and how you, being an athlete, helped you recover or might have even impeded your progress?
It was a big thing. And maybe a good place to start is how I found out about it. So about 2.5 years ago, I ran a 100-mile race in Lake Tahoe, the Tahoe Rim Trail 100, which beautiful place to run an ultramarathon. When I ran it, there were forest fires nearby, which was affecting a lot of people just in terms of breathing. And I thought at the halfway point that I might need to drop just because the smoke was uncomfortable. I was feeling fine, but just struggling to breathe. Thankfully, the doctors at the aid stations were super helpful, and they got me feeling a bit better again, and I managed to finish. And then at the end of the race, I went into the medical tent just to get checked out, and the doctor there heard a heart murmur, and he said, "Did you know that you have a heart murmur?" "No." He said, "Well, maybe get it checked out when you get home." So I did. Then went to a cardiologist to get an echocardiogram, and they called me back like half an hour later, which is never a good sign, right? Can you come into the office this afternoon? And that was when we found out that I have this disease called bicuspid aortic valve disease, and it's a congenital defect. So it was present when I was born, and it manifests over time. From what I understand, there's typically two periods in a person's life when it can manifest. One is as a teenager, which I didn't have, and then as you get into your 50s, this is when a lot of people start to experience symptoms. One of which being the heart murmur. Typically, people start to get shortness of breath and dizziness as the basically what's happening, right, is that the valve, because it doesn't have all three cusps on it, it only has two, hence bicuspid aortic valve. The blood flow through that valve is not abnormal, and it starts to calcify, and the opening gets smaller and smaller, and you get less blood flow going to where it needs to, right, and you start to get dizzy. I didn't have any of those symptoms, so I guess going back to one of your original questions, once I started to see a sports cardiologist, he said that my athletic lifestyle, the fact that I've been running and being, having a healthy diet, those are helpful in terms of minimizing these symptoms that people often get. So I felt fine. I didn't notice any issues with this. It was only the measurements that we saw. I was having regular tests done by my cardiologist, and he saw about 5 months ago some pretty significant changes in the measurements that they take. And then we decided, I'm relatively young, I'm healthy, I'm fit. Now's the time to get the surgery done. And essentially what they do is they replace that valve with a functional one, and at the same time they repaired my aortic root, which had also become damaged over time. That was why I needed the open heart surgery. So yeah, like you said, that was 2.5 months ago, and I'm very grateful that this doctor in the middle of the mountains, right in a medical tent, heard this, because if I hadn't had it diagnosed at that point, I probably would have just kept on doing what I was doing, not kind of dialing things back as I have done over the past couple of years. And I probably would have been out in the mountains running somewhere and just collapsed, because that's ultimately what happens with particularly the aortic root as it starts to deteriorate. It was, I guess, thanks to running in multiple ways. One, it was keeping me fit, but one, it took me to this place where I met this amazing doctor who diagnosed this before anything terrible happened.
Right, which you wouldn't have been able probably to do. You wouldn't have. I talk a lot about with people that are on a fitness journey, and I'm positive that you do too. Sort of how much is too much, and I know for me, in the journey into the Olympics, which was a almost 14-year journey, there was definitely times, and especially towards the end there, as I was aging, like we all do, where I just was training so hard that I felt terrible most of the time. Like there was so much damage happening in my body, and I wasn't always letting it repair enough to get back to feeling well. And that was from a definitely a physical perspective, but a mental perspective as well, because there's such massive hormone shifts in male and female athletes when you are pushing so hard. And I have a good friend who's actually a professor of diet, disease, and exercise. And he taught me that he had a heart event, and it was a combination of enlarged athlete heart and AFib. And he was on his bike, unfortunately, and hit the deck, and a doctor happened to be driving by and saved his life. But he taught me that, and I think this is just very interesting for our listeners, because I was really surprised by it, but good to know, to be aware of. If you create the enlarged heart pre-puberty, it never returns to normal size. But if you create it post-puberty, it does. So I created which was an enlarged heart post-puberty, and I haven't gone to get a scan, but I believe it's it's back to the size that it would be if I hadn't done that to it. But he was an athlete since he was like 4, like an extreme athlete all the way through. And so his never went down to back to normal size. So I think there's it's important for people to recognize, how much is too much when we're pushing ourselves. And I get asked all the time, if somebody does a hard workout, oh, this felt good, should I do it again the next day? And it's important to think about that working out is not, it is damage, right? That's what we do to repair. And that's a conversation that is, I continue to have. I had it with a friend this morning who did a really hard work, and he's like, let's do this again tomorrow morning. I'm like, no, you got to repair, like we're going to recover. That's how the body starts to build the muscle and also get rid of all the toxins from the hard workout. So I'd love to hear because of who you are in your athletic career, kind of your thoughts on that. Because there's people listening. It is definitely good to go out and have a hard workout, but knowing when to kind of curb it off.
Yeah. I think it's a really important point, and it's something that I discuss with the athletes I coach quite frequently. There's often a temptation, I think, to you come into the ultra running world and the races are so amazing, right? They take you to beautiful places, and then you just have this temptation to sign up for a race every weekend or every month, and then working out in between that as well. I think one of the ways I always approached this was trying to balance what I was doing, and not, you can run every day or maybe 5 days a week, but not like extreme hard workouts every day, which I think is often a temptation of more inexperienced athletes. I don't remember who wrote where I read this phrase, but stress plus rest equals growth, right? And which is kind of what you said. If you're only doing the stress part, whether that's worrying about something you're going to be doing next week, or stress in terms of workouts, hard workouts, and you're not bringing in that rest component, whether that be emotional rest or physical rest, you're not going to grow in the way that you want to.
We want acute stress, not chronic stress.
Exactly. Yeah.
How was the hospital experience for you? How did that work as a vegan? What did you think about the food? Dotsie has some thoughts about her friend, Eric, whom she helped also when he was in the hospital because he was actually in a coma. And she made sure, Dotsie, you can tell the story because I don't want to, but David, tell us your experience there.
Yeah.
With it.
Not so great on the food side. So the funny thing is that for whatever reason, they didn't have me down as a vegan in their system. And so the first day or two when they came by with the food, they listed off the choices, which there always seemed to be Salisbury steak on the menu, which
like
the
from
guy
the 1970s or 80s.
I know, right?
Nobody eats that anymore.
Well, the guy next to me ate it every day, and he just had quadruple bypass surgery and had diabetes. So there's a whole other thing to unpack here. But what was funny was that, I told the woman that came by with the menu, hey, I'm vegan, and they had these nice options like quinoa and vegetables, which were, not amazing, but good. And then once they had me in the system as a vegan, like the options were terrible. Like one day I just got a plate of fruit. That's it. Nothing else. So they really, I was very confused as to what happened because they obviously were able to make foods that didn't have animal products in them. But once they knew that I was a vegan, then it just got really limited to things like fruit and plain rice and stuff, very badly cooked vegetables. So I think I was very fortunate that I had a couple of friends and also my wife relatively close by, and they brought me some tasty vegan food from outside. I had forgotten how bad the food was until you brought it up, but it was both not tasty and also just not nutritionally optimal as well. And the stuff they were feeding to the omnivores was just terrible, so unhealthy.
Yeah. my friend was, as Alexander mentioned, was in a coma, and so they were he was on a feeding tube, and there was dairy in there, and he hadn't had dairy in more than 25 years. So he started aspirating and rejecting it, and they were like, didn't know what was wrong. And I said, well, it could be that he hasn't had this in 25 years, and he would be horrified if he were awake that this was happening. So it takes him like a whole day to find the vegan food through the tube. But then I go back 2 days later, and they have put him back on the dairy because the dietitian said the vegan one wasn't giving him enough calories. And I said, well, just give him more. And they said, well, she didn't say to do that. And I was like, okay, well, let's talk to her about it. Let's consider that. So then they did that. I mean, it's like a math equation, like just get whatever calories he needs, put it in. So that was a strange experience, especially since in California, we passed a law that there has to be these options in hospitals and prisons, and not just a plate of fruit, right? Like you have to have a certain amount of calories.
Let's talk about Synthesis Capital. So you left Good Food Institute, which is where you were when we last spoke with you, and you started a company called Synthesis Capital, which is working to transform the food system through biotechnology. Can you tell us why you started Synthesis Capital? What were you motivated by? You feel like it's a good investment for your own future, or is it you love food tech? Is it animal welfare, climate, health? What's going on?
Yeah, wow, that's a big question. I mean, I switched careers and joined the Good Food Institute back in 2017 because I wanted to commit the rest of my life, my career, to solving the problems with our food system, specifically removing animals from the food system, and that's what drew me to GFI. And it was such an incredible place to work. It was really at the epicenter of everything that was going on in the alternative protein space. How I met you and Dotsy as well through GFI, and also how I met my co-founders at Synthesis Capital. They were running a family office that was investing in alternative protein companies, and I helped them with a number of projects while they were there, and that kind of evolved into us deciding to work together and start Synthesis, which we did coming up on three years ago. And I think the reason that I decided to leave GFI and start Synthesis was really that I saw it as an opportunity to really focus my skills and experience in a very specific way to change the food system. I'm a scientist by training. I've worked in big companies in the biotech space, so I understand the science, but I also understand how to take ideas and turn them into useful products. And that's what I love to do. And now I get to look for companies that are doing that in a very sustainable and impactful way, and then help them once we invest in them, really help them go from early stage concepts, right? Some of them are still in the lab, or they're just building what's called a pilot facility. So just starting to test these technologies in a sort of pre-commercial setting, and I get to help them go all the way to commercial launch. And I can't think of a better job for me than what I'm doing now. It's just so intellectually stimulating, but two, I really believe that these companies we're investing in are going to fundamentally change our food system for the better.
So Synthesis invests in like 4 types of technologies in the alternative protein industry, I guess I should call it. Plant-based, single cell, recombinant, and cultivated. Can you explain a little bit about what are these? I mean, I don't think people realized that there were all these different ways to make alternative foods.
Yeah, and they kind of go in that order from sort of most mature technology to the ones that are furthest away from commercial reality. So if we start with plant-based, this is, what we can all eat today, or versions of that. So plant-based burgers, plant-based chicken nuggets, or plant-based milk, all of those products or technologies that can use plants to replace, or I should say, biomimic animal products, right? I think that where we look in that plant-based technology area is away from the sort of branded products, the sort of end products, the Beyond Meats. We're not investing in those types of companies. We're looking upstream to what's called enabling technologies that can produce better ingredients, better processing technologies, manufacturing technologies that can make better plant-based meat and dairy products at the end. Just to give you maybe an example, most of the plant-based meat and dairy products that we eat today use either soy or pea protein as their primary protein ingredient. If you look on the label of most, that's typically what you'll see. Maybe some wheat, gluten in there as well. And those soy and pea crops were not bred for alternative meat and dairy applications. The soy was bred for soybean oil and animal feed. That's where most of the soy in the planet goes, right? Like 85% of it, I think, is converted into meal and oil, and most of that goes to animals. So soy was bred for that. Pea was bred for starch and animal feed. And so there's a lot of opportunities to find new crops, so other alternatives to soy and pea, or breed or engineer better versions of soy and pea that are specifically designed for making better plant-based meat and dairy products. Think about a pea milk that you've drank, and there's that sort of beany off note, right? When you drink it, you can remove those things genetically by breeding those out of a crop. And then you have an ingredient that you don't have to process as much. You don't have to add in these masking agents to the ingredient list to try and reduce those off notes. You just remove them genetically. So that's the kind of stuff we're looking for in the plant-based. And I think maybe this takes us down another path, but I think, what we're seeing today is that there's been a somewhat of a downturn in the amount of plant-based meat and dairy products that consumers are buying and eating here in the US and elsewhere as well. And I think for me, that comes back to the fact that they just don't taste good enough yet. For these modern plant-based meat and dairy products, what we're trying to do, what the industry is trying to do, is not make a better vegan burger patty, right? It's to create something that is going to help meat eaters or dairy consumers move away from animal-based products, because these new versions taste just as good as or better. They're better for you and they cost the same. And the current technologies just aren't there yet, with a couple of exceptions. But I would say in general, if you eat a plant-based burger, most of them don't taste exactly like a beef burger yet. And so we're investing in technologies that are going to allow that to happen.
Yeah. You just touched on something that I think is so important to break down and understand. And you talked about breeding out certain characteristics, so genetically modifying. Can you break down GMO? And, when you were talking about it, I'm like, now that sounds like that makes sense. And it's not unhealthy to take this characteristic out, et cetera. So
yeah.
Go.
Yeah. So, formally, genetic modification is when you take a foreign gene and put it into a plant or a crop, right? So when you think of GM soy, that often has like pest resistance or insecticide resistance genes in it, which makes those plants easier to grow. They can spray more insecticide on. There's both positives and negatives to that. That's kind of classical GM technology.
Or doesn't that mean they can spray less because it's genetically modified to be resistant to the bugs, so they don't have to spray?
The crop itself is, but then because what they're trying to do is get rid of all the weeds and stuff around it, right? So they pile on the pesticides and insecticides and the plant is more tolerant. The soy is more tolerant to the higher levels of insecticide.
Okay.
So, I mean, there's a lot of both. I think there are valid concerns about that, but there's a lot of misinformation around all of that. But if we put that to the side, what's happened in the last 10 years on the sort of editing or engineering front, as it's called, is, well, you might have heard of CRISPR, this technology that was discovered, I think, a little bit over a decade ago. The two scientists that discovered it, they won the Nobel Prize, and this allows very precise edits in the genome of a crop or a microbe, and this is very different to the sort of old-fashioned GM technologies where you're just taking a big piece of DNA from something else and putting it inside. Here, you're making very sort of surgical changes to the genome that could happen in nature as well over time. So I think of this type of technology as really just an accelerant of what could happen in nature or through classical breeding methods. And I think this is a really exciting area of biotechnology that's being applied to medicine, but also to food as well. And some of the companies that we support are using this technology to create better crops or better microbes or animal cells, which are in those other technologies that we didn't get to yet. But hopefully that helps you and the viewers better understand GMO and gene editing and breeding. I think, like any technology, they can be used for both good things and bad things. And I think, fortunately, in the food industry today, I think these technologies are being used primarily for good, which is great. Yeah.
I understand what you're saying. And as far as soy goes, that they are making them more resistant to bugs. And so then they're also resistant to sprayers. What's bad about that, if anything? Doing that to the soy?
I mean, what it allows the industry to do is grow soy more efficiently.
Right. I meant to our health. Like, is there any?
Yeah. So I think that there is, and this is definitely not an area of expertise for me, but there have been concerns about, large amounts of pesticide glyphosate being in certain farming areas and that contributing to negative health. I don't think that there's a lot of data to conclusively prove that. I could be wrong, but at least everything that I've read doesn't point to glyphosate being the sort of the evil that it's put out to be. But I think it's important that we have more discussions about the use of these types of insecticides, and I think there's more studies that need to be done. Right? I think these resistant crops were kind of just rolled out without a lot of studies. And I think some of the practices that were done by these big seed companies with farmers, not even talking about the health side, but just how they kind of forced farmers to use these seeds. I think there were a lot of less good things that happened when these technologies were originally introduced. I don't know if I couldn't tell you, .c, that I'm with 100% certainty that all of these pesticides and insecticides are healthy. I think that the amount that's used today is generally safe, but I think more studies should be done for sure. More long-term health studies on these should be done.
But the problem is not the genetic modification. The problem is because they've genetically modified, now they can handle, and be more resistant to all the glyphosate. So that's an important delineation, I feel like.
And one other issue is that GMO crops are owned often by the company. And so farmers then are sold these GMO seeds. They're not allowed to use the seeds that come from those plants. They have to buy new ones, is my understanding. And if, for example, some of your seeds blow over into your neighbor and they end up having crops that happen to have this same GMO configuration, they can be sued by the company for growing crops that they don't, quote unquote, own. It really takes away the power from the farmer. And in my opinion, insecticides, it's better to not kill insects, so let's work with the land. And so I have a big issue with all the ability of these plants to withstand insecticides so that the companies can just spray huge amounts to get rid of the plants they don't want, which are maybe not good for their business, but are very good for the planet and the balance. And insects are so important that just killing them like that, to me, it just has a lot of questions about what we're doing. And I think there we should really be careful. But let's move on, if you don't mind, because I really want to get into the other three technologies, single cell, recombinant, and cultivated, so we can all understand how these alternative proteins are made.
Yeah, absolutely. So single cell is the use of microbes and fermentation to produce biomass. And by biomass, I mean just the cellular mass that's created by growing microbes in a big fermentation tank and allowing them to multiply. So you start with a small amount of these microbes, you feed them sugar and other nutrients, and over time they multiply, they double, and you get a large amount of biomass out. There are already companies selling products that could be classified as single cell. So corn, QU-ORN, which has been around for decades, that's what they do, right? They grow microbes in big tanks and then turn those into mostly vegan products. I think they also have some products that have dairy in them, but most of their products are vegan. There are companies like Meaty, which they're based in Colorado. They're using fermentation to grow fungal mycelium into sort of structured chicken and beef products. So I tend to think of it as it's very similar to plant-based, right? But instead of growing crops on a field to produce protein, here you're growing microbes in a big tank, like a beer brewery, like you might see in a beer brewery, and producing protein from that, and then you can make the same kinds of products that you could with plant proteins. There are some pros and cons to both, but in general, it's just another way to produce very nutritious and sustainable protein. And you might think that in certain parts of the world, right, where it may be difficult to grow certain types of crops for protein, this technology becomes advantageous because you don't need sunlight, you just need big tanks and sugar to feed these microbes. And what's really exciting about this area is that there are now companies working with microbes that can consume waste products. So one of the companies that we've invested in is called Archeon. They work with a particular type of microbe that consumes carbon dioxide and hydrogen and converts that into amino acids and protein. So they can take waste CO2 that's produced by many industries and convert that into food ingredients. And there's a lot of that starting to happen now, using this sort of single cell fermentation processes to produce useful food products. It's quite an exciting area and with a lot of potential. Recombinant. So this is the third one. Here, this is GM or GM technology, right? So in this case, you're taking a gene from some other organism and you're putting it either into a microbe or a plant and then producing a lot of that protein. The example I like to give is Impossible Foods. So in the Impossible Burger, you have this leg hemoglobin ingredient, which gives it its red color and meaty taste. That is produced through recombinant protein technology. It is technology that's been around for decades. It's what the pharmaceutical industry used to produce vaccines. The food industry uses it to produce enzymes like chymosin, which is used in cheese making. So it's a very known technology, but now companies are using it to produce these animal proteins like whey and hemoglobin, casein, which provide a lot of the functional attributes of the animal-based products, right? Like the meaty taste in a beef burger or the stretchiness and melting properties of cheese. It's very important to have these proteins from that come from the animal in order to create that full sensory experience. But rather than relying on the animal, the cow, to provide those, we can use this technology, recombinant protein technology, to produce those proteins in isolation. So I think of this as kind of like an enabler for the entire industry, right? So if you have a plant-based meat product that perhaps doesn't really taste like chicken, or it doesn't have the right bite, you can add in these recombinant protein ingredients that behave like the proteins found in milk or meat, and are going to enhance the sensory properties of those products. And kind of going back to where we started, right? Like, I really believe that most of the products on the market today just don't taste good enough to help most consumers shift their dietary patterns. And I think as these new technologies come out, that's really going to change things. Things are going to start tasting more and more like the actual meat and dairy products that most people tend to like to eat.
So the recombinant, is that a vegan thing?
Well, I think it depends. It's a great question, and it depends on how you define vegan, I think, right? I would say yes, because you're not using an animal in any way to produce these proteins, but they are animal-based proteins. So there may be some people that feel like, well, I don't really want to eat, or drink milk that has recombinant whey protein in it, which you can today, by the way. You can buy that in the US and drink milk that has whey protein in it. You can buy protein powder that is whey protein powder that didn't come from a cow. I personally think it's fine because you're saving animals by consuming these products, but I think it depends on your viewpoint.
So they have they don't have the health drawbacks also, but the good thing is they don't use animals at all. They just, okay, got it.
That's correct. I mean, I think it's a good question about the health. What you can do with these, right, is that you're just producing a purified protein of some kind. Now we could argue about whether whey protein is necessary in a diet. I certainly don't think I need it, but many people do, right? And I think this is the point of this type of technology, is by producing these proteins, we can create tastier products that appeal to more consumers.
Mm-hmm. Would the bucket of whey protein say whey protein? Because
Yes.
It could, right? So basically, we're just going to trick them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way it's labeled
lightly,
today is animal-free whey protein, I think, is how it looks on the label of the products that you can buy in the store.
Okay. Is that Perfect Day, that company Perfect Day?
That's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so they have some ice creams and I think some fluid milks and a protein powder that contain this whey protein. Yeah. And I think that's just, Perfect Day and Impossible are just the first examples of what's to come. There's, probably at least 50, probably close to 100 companies, early stage companies that are working on this type of technology, different proteins, different ways to produce them. So I think this, over the next 5 years, we're going to really see a lot more of these functional ingredients coming into the market, into food products that we can eat.
I haven't tasted Perfect Day or any of those. I don't think I've tasted a recombinant food. Or do they pass your taste test, David?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably not the best taste tester. We joke at Synthesis, one of my two co-founders, one of them is vegan like me, and the other is not. He's a flexitarian, and I don't think I'm the best judge of what whether something is meaty or cheesy, because I haven't eaten the real things in so long. But I do think that they are superior in terms of just overall sensory properties, whether that's the sort of more neutral taste in these dairy products, or the mouthfeel being a bit, creamier than you would experience in a typical oat or soy milk. But I'm fine drinking and eating the standard plant-based ones. But like, I've said a couple of times now, most consumers are not. And that's really who these products are for. Yeah.
Hey, friends and listeners of the Switch for Good podcast. Yep, that's you. I have some really exciting news. Dotsie and I have started a Switch for Good podcast Facebook group. We created it so we can build a community of fans that will help us improve the show and deliver on the topics that you want to learn more about. So we want to hear what your favorite content is, what you want more of, and what you want less of. And if you like the length of the show, Dotsie and I are always talking about the length of the show, right, Dotsie?
Yes.
We want to tailor our show around the needs and desires of our incredible listeners, almost 500,000 of you. And it's really simple to join. Just go to our Switch for Good Facebook page. That's Switch, the number 4, and then Good. And then click on groups. And there we are, the Switch for Good podcast chat. You can post directly in the group, share ideas, talk to other listeners, and connect with like-minded folks. So go, run, join our Facebook group and tell us what you want.
I'm always curious on, what will it take for people to adopt meat or cheese or milk made in a lab? The people that eat meat are not feeling the squeeze of the environment. Maybe they don't believe the health. They're not worried about the animals. So they're going to still want their burger from a cow. And I'm just imagining a future where we are squeezed literally so tightly on the planet because of overpopulation as well, that there becomes a literal need to consume these or it's really, we're out. And there's certainly a lot of media articles that we've seen lately on the demise of alternative proteins. And they're at the same time, a seemingly concerted effort on the amount of, disinformation really that's coming from big meat that seems somewhat coordinated to create this negativity, this negative sentiment around alternative protein products. And they like to focus thus far on ultra processed foods, right? Like that's what they're honing in on, which can be convincing to a consumer, because once you start talking about something grown in a lab, it's just people just instantly make that face like, I don't want any part of that. That's weird. Well, I mean, we think it's weird what people do to animals on a daily basis in slaughterhouses. I mean, that's some weird stuff if we wanted to grab a camera and look at the two processes, right? But what are your feelings and thoughts on this? I'm positive it keeps you up at night because this is what you do and what you believe in. What does that look like, getting the regular Joe and Jill to move to consuming alternatives?
Yeah, it's such an important question, I think. And I don't think there's enough discussions about this in this alternative protein or food industry. I think that, at the end of the day, consumers are going to switch when they can access products that taste just as good as or better than the conventional products, but they need to be priced competitively as well, right? So, for example, I hate to keep using the Impossible Burger as a kind of example, but it's a good one because it's out on the market. Mm-hmm. You can go into Burger King and order an Impossible Whopper, and I think most consumers would be hard pressed to tell the difference between the two, because it tastes good and it's, inside a bun, and it's got all kinds of other stuff in it that, are part of the whole flavor package. But it costs more, right? So they haven't solved the cost issue yet. You have to pay more to eat it. So you're paying a premium to eat something that is almost as good as the real thing. So we're not quite there yet. And then, so I think we need to solve those problems first. So make the products taste better, bring the cost of them down so they're accessible to everyone, not just wealthy people in rich countries. But then there's this other issue, right, of the sort of ultra processed and non-natural words that are being used. And I think that there is a coordinated effort now from interested parties, the meat industry and others. And there was a good article actually a couple of months ago in Fast Company, and another one in Sentient Media that spoke about this sort of coordinated attempts and some of the groups that are behind this information, and really calling out the sort of processed nature of these products and using terms like lab grown, which are, they don't sound appealing, right? At the end of the day, yes, these companies are developing things in the lab, but ultimately they're going to be produced in a factory that is very clean, much cleaner than a slaughterhouse, right? So if you were able to shine a light or a camera on these facilities that will be built to produce recombinant proteins or cultivated meat that we didn't speak about yet, they're going to be far cleaner, far nicer. There's not going to be any blood or screaming animals present, right?
Or poop.
Exactly.
I mean, that's what we're eating, or people that are eating it don't realize how much they're consuming and why it always has a warning label that you have to cook it to death or you could die.
Yeah.
Antibiotic use and
exactly.
pandemic concerns about another pandemic like avian flu.
Exactly. All of these things are the animal agriculture has such a huge negative impact on all of these things. But I think, what I wanted to say on this sort of use of this ultra processed or processed is that I feel like the vegan community or vegan and vegetarian community has the best intentions, right? We want to shift consumers away from animal products. We don't want animals used to produce food or other materials anymore. And I think everyone or most people that are eating a vegan or vegetarian diet feel that way. But I think many of us are playing into the hands of these people that are trying to influence eating behaviors, right, behind whether it's big meat or someone else. And you see a lot of vegans and vegetarians talking negatively about, lab grown meat and processed meat. And I think there's an opportunity for the community to step away from that and not play into the hands of these, big meat or whoever's doing this. Like it's the classic playbook, right? Was used by tobacco and the fuel industries. And I think that we're kind of playing into the hands of those folks right now. And I think there's an opportunity for you guys and others to kind of educate people on what's really going on. And processed is such a vague word, right? Like pretty much all the food we eat is processed in some manner.
You have to process the bacon from the
pig.
I mean,
And the way things are classified as processed or ultra processed really doesn't make very much sense. But I think the incumbent industry is using this in a very clever way to raise doubts about the, plant-based meat and dairy products that are on the market.
You mentioned earlier that there were fewer consumers trying these products. They weren't selling as well. You mentioned earlier that these products weren't selling as well as they used to, these plant-based alternatives. Is that true, or is it just that there are more on the market? So, for example, Impossible might not be selling as many because there's actually more competition. Overall, it seems like people are really using a lot, especially of the non-dairy milks, and there's so many more choices.
I think the milk, non-dairy milks continue to grow well, and there's better ones that are out now, right? I think that you can buy like barista oat milk that foams really well. So they've continued to improve, and I think that there's less of a concern about this sort of processed, non-natural issues as I think most people are thinking about plant-based meat products when they think about those negative terms. I think it's very there are certainly pockets, I think, in the US and in other countries where growth still continues to be very positive and more consumers are buying these, particularly younger consumers, which I think is great, right? That's what we need, is the young consumers really shifting their dietary patterns. But I think in other parts of the world, there's been a bit of a slowdown. And I think that's a consequence of what we were talking about with this sort of these campaigns around words like process, but also just, the inflation and these things cost more. So I think there are people that weren't, fully bought into the vegan diet, that they're seeing that these things cost, $1 or $2 more, and they don't want to spend it on that. They need to save their money. They want to feed their family, which I completely understand. And then they shift back to the products that they're used to that cost less, right? Which comes back to what we were talking about before. You need to solve both taste and cost and nutrition in order to shift the most of the population.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Darcy can talk about all the subsidies that the dairy and meat
Oh,
industry,
yeah.
so that helps keep their price low.
Yeah, but I think, back to the milk thing real quick, the alternatives, we have to recognize that I think it is the immediacy of the scenario where 70%, a little over 70% of the world's population can't even digest dairy.
Yeah.
So people feel like crap when they eat it, and they know it. No one, hardly anymore, used to be 20 years ago, I'm not really sure, right? Now they know that's exactly what it is. So then you offer these alternatives. They can be sort of okay, and people will choose them. But no one feels like crap if they eat a chicken sandwich. Immediately. It's going to take years for your arteries to. So they are expecting so much more because they feel fine when they eat a chicken sandwich. But the milk thing, I mean, that's 73% of the dairy industry's income right now is coming from our federal government. It's not coming from the general population. They're not buying it anymore. There's so many alternatives. And now they, like you said, with the foamy oat milk, barista, like now it's just like there's no reason to drink a glass of milk or put it in your coffee. And so that's why we're seeing the market, right, at 17, 18, 19% of the market, the plant-based milks, right. and then but the meat's kind of still. I have a question for you about the Burger King Whopper, the Impossible Whopper. Do we know what motivates a meat eater to eat it? Like, have there been any, sort of, I lack of better words, like studies? It costs a little more, so they have to, get over that and say, okay, I'm willing to do that. Are they curious? Do they try it once, or but then they try it, and do they think it's tasty and they say, oh, let's try it again? I'm wondering if they believe, although they won't admit, that it's healthier. And maybe they feel better after it than they'd feel better after. And so, what's motivating? Because it's still there. So people are buying it, I imagine, or it wouldn't still be. So what do we know? Because that would answer a lot of questions if we know. I mean, we just had to stand outside of Burger King, I guess, and just do a whole bunch of polls, but why the meat eaters are buying it.
Yeah, it's a great question. You should get the head of Impossible Foods on the podcast. Okay. And ask him. Yeah. But I will try to answer since he's not here. I think that at least in the US, where the Impossible Whopper is sold, right? Even though it comes in like a green wrapper and all of this, I don't think most consumers here care that much about climate, or at least the impact of food on climate. And so I think the temptation to try the Impossible Whopper comes from this sort of health halo that's been around plant-based meat products and a assumption that it is healthier. I don't know the data on repeat purchases at Burger King. I know that they track those things. I just don't know what they've seen. But they haven't taken it off there, right? So it must be you can get it at every single Burger King. So it must be doing well enough for them to keep it on the menu and keep selling it. And if you can go to Iowa or somewhere else in the middle of America and buy this thing and continue to buy it, I think that points to some positives about how good it tastes compared to the conventional one.
Is this too meaty for the vegans? Like, I can do a Beyond, but the second I tasted Impossible, I was like, oh no, that's not going to happen ever again. So
the first time I tried it, I thought they'd made a mistake and brought me the real thing. It is very meaty. Yeah.
So cultivated, the fourth technology.
Right.
We're getting there.
That's okay. It's all right. It's good. We're learning.
Yeah. So we started with plants. Then we talked about microbes to produce protein. Then we talked about these recombinant technologies to produce sort of individual animal proteins like hemoglobin and whey. So cultivated is the use of tissue engineering technologies that came from the medical industry where I used to work to grow animal cells and turn them into actual meat. So you're taking, essentially what's happening is you're taking a small biopsy from an animal that's done in a very humane and painless way, just like, if you were to go to the doctor and get a tissue biopsy, it would be very similar to that. Then that very small amount of tissue, they isolate a particular kind of cell from that tissue called a stem cell. A stem cell is a special type of cell that we have in our bodies that can give rise to all different types of cells. So you can, turn these stem cells. Imagine in your own body, you have an accident and you cut yourself. Stem cells are part of that wound healing process to generate that new skin and heal that wound. So we have these inside our bodies, animals have them, and scientists use these stem cells that are present inside this small sample of tissue to turn those into more cells, and then turn those stem cells into the cells that make up meat, which is primarily muscle and fat. So this is real animal meat, but made without the animal. So this, in theory, could be the closest that we can get to producing actual meat, right? And I've had the opportunity to try this, which was a pretty strange experience. I ate chicken, and I've had chicken and beef actually made through this process, and I haven't eaten meat in probably I think about 9 years now. The sort of immediate memories that I had, it was so interesting, right? I bit into this chicken and it was like, that is chicken. And it very different from a sort of plant-based chicken product, both the flavors and the texture. So it was again, it's not something that I need to eat, but it's very clear to me how this can really change our food system. The way companies are bringing these technologies to market today is in what's called hybrid formats. So this is mixing these animal cells together with plant material to create a product like a chicken product. And this is really being done because the costs are still quite high with this technology. And so by blending, say, 20% of these animal cells together with plant proteins and plant fats, you can make something sizable, but also reduce the cost as well. But I think it's the furthest away from commercial reality, although there are now 2 companies in the US that have been approved by the regulatory authorities to sell products. So you can buy it in, there's a restaurant in DC and a restaurant in the Bay Area where you can go and eat these products now. So I think I can see that it's scary, but I think it's such an exciting technology because, as we've been talking about, most meat eaters like to eat meat, not just here in the US, but as lower income countries, as people move into higher income brackets, there's clear data that shows that as that happens, the demand for meat increases. So that is not going to go away anytime soon. And so we need technologies like this that can produce real meat that tastes just like meat. It feels like meat, but without the animal. So I'm super excited about what's going to come next with this.
As someone who is wary about any kind of animal exploitation, tell me about those cell lines. I know stem cells can last a long time. You can test using a stem cell line for ages and ages, but it's not forever. How many animals, do you have a sense of how many animals might be used for a certain amount of this product?
Yeah, it's such a small number. Really, from a small sample of tissue, you can have billions of cells because, like you said, you can just start with a few and create many more from that. So I imagine a future, I hope this happens, right, where we can remove animal agriculture, particularly industrial animal agriculture, from the food system. And there will be some cows and pigs and sheep that get to live their whole lives on a not in an intensive farming environment, just in open fields. And maybe once every couple of years, we need to go to them and take a small tissue sample. It would be great if we didn't have to do that. But I think it will be very, very minimal with the technologies that are being developed. And I think that, comparing that to the current state of how, chickens and cows are kept in captivity and how many of them, right? It's just so drastically different that I think the slight negatives of having to use animals in that way outweighs the everything that's happening today in our food system.
Yeah, it sort of sounds like a vast improvement, but yeah. So before you go, there's a fifth technology. Synthesis also invests in 3D printing and precision breeding. And the 3D printing thing, I'm like, I don't even understand what that is. I know what it is for my nephew to make me a cute little giraffe with his 3D printer that I put on my desk. But what in the world as it relates to food?
It's so exciting. And so we've invested in a company called Redefine Meat. It's an Israeli company. They have not launched products in the US yet, but you can eat them in Europe. I imagine you have viewers in Europe and Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And you can, Israel is very widely available. In Europe, it's available in multiple countries now. And basically what they're doing is using scalable 3D printing. So not like the little desktop thing that your nephew uses, but really industrial size 3D printers to create structured meat. So
I've seen 3D printing on a massive scale, like they're 3D printing homes now.
Yeah.
Which is massive, but it's like, I get that still.
Yeah. So imagine big blocks of meat coming out of a 3D printer. So you're not building a home, but you're producing very large pieces of meat, which can then be sliced into, steaks. But the important thing here is, one, both the speed and scale of these printers that they're working with, but also the amount of research that went into understanding what makes meat, right? So they're focused on beef and lamb at the moment. Mm-hmm. And not that you do today, right? But if you were to cut open a piece of like a steak, you would see the muscle and the fats like integrated into the muscle, right? And you have this very sort of complex structure, which provides a lot of the sensory experiences that consumers love when they eat a piece of meat, right? That mouth feel, the bite that you get, the juiciness of it, all of those things that people really crave. What this company did is really take a deep look at all of that and understand it, and basically create a blueprint from that, right? Which they then use in the 3D printing. They use plant-based ingredients, so plant proteins, plant fats, and other ingredients as basically the inks, right, of this printing process. And then they have this blueprint to make a steak in a particular way, and they're using the 3D printer to print that exact shape, and you get what comes out is a plant-based whole cut product, like a steak or a lamb piece of lamb that has that mouthfeel that is very difficult to get without this type of technology. I don't know if you've had any of the kind of more structured like plant-based steaks and things. They're not exactly right. And I think that 3D printing, when it's done in the right way, like this company is doing, can really start to create products outside of that sort of ground category, right? Like the burgers and chicken nuggets and things. They're focusing more on these. They do make those products, but they're focusing more on these structured products, which have been so hard to date to make without these technologies.
Yeah. So like, I'm thinking of people that like a leg of lamb, but so it's plants, but it will look like a leg of lamb. That's mind blowing. Yeah. And exciting for the animals.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow.
And precision breeding, is that using the CRISPR, or is that?
So precision breeding doesn't need technologies like CRISPR. So it's basically what we spoke about before, right? So one of the companies that we've invested in is making pea a variety of pea that has more protein in it and less off flavors, a better color. And they're doing all of this by breeding different varieties of pea together to get these new varieties that have all of the properties that, a plant-based meat company would need to make better products.
Fantastic. Well, there's a lot of hope then for an animal-free food system, thanks to you. So folks, where can they go to learn more about what y'all are doing and learn more about this space?
Yeah, I'm not the most active on social media. I think the best place to find me and what we're doing is at synthesis.capital. So that's just type in synthesis.capital and you'll find our webpage, and you can go to, there's a thing on me. I think my email's there. So I'm very happy to talk to anyone about what's going on in the alternative protein industry, or folks that are, interested in my journey with my heart health. I'd love to, help people navigate their own journeys, health journeys, whether that's heart related or not. So, would love to chat to some of your audience about any of those things.
Thank you. It was very kind of you.
Yeah,
very
thank
kind.
you so much for coming back and sharing with us all the great technologies that have evolved in the last few years, especially.
Yeah, I'll come back again in another 3 or 4 years, and it'll be a whole different industry by then as well. Just the pace at which things are moving is, I think it's really exciting what our food system's gonna look like in a short amount of time, and it's so necessary.
Yeah, I can't believe what's changed since episode 37 and 255. So we'll see you soon. Thanks for spending time with us.